A racist man mocks a black chef, loudly ridiculing his talent and dignity in front of the entire restaurant. But when the chef calmly reveals a shocking truth about his past, the man's arrogance turns to shame. And what happens next will leave you speechless. The aroma of freshly prepared meals filled the high-end restaurant as soft jazz played in the background. The clinking of wine glasses and murmurs of content diners created an air of sophistication. It was a place where wealthy patrons sought to satisfy their refined palates. And tonight, among them, was Thomas Hargrove, a man well known for his wealth and his arrogance. Thomas sat at a corner table, dressed in a tailored grey suit, tapping impatiently on the table with his fork. His date, a young woman named Lila, glanced nervously around the room, sensing his growing irritation. "What's taking so long?" he grumbled, glaring toward the kitchen doors. "For what they charge here, the food should practically serve itself." Lila offered a tentative smile. "I'm sure it'll be worth the wait." But Thomas scoffed, his voice loud enough to carry to nearby tables. "You'd think these so-called chefs could handle a simple order. Can't expect much, though, when they let anyone into the kitchen these days." The doors to the kitchen swung open, and Andre Carter, the restaurant's head chef, emerged carrying a beautifully plated dish. His tall frame and calm demeanor commanded attention as he approached Thomas's table. Andre had worked tirelessly to earn his place in this prestigious restaurant, and his presence was a testament to years of dedication. "Good evening," Andre said warmly, setting the dish before Thomas. "This is our signature entree, prepared with care. I hope you enjoy it." Thomas barely glanced at the plate. Instead, his eyes narrowed on Andre, and his lips curled into a smirk. "You're the chef?" he asked, his tone dripping with disbelief. Andre stood tall, his professionalism unwavering. "Yes, sir. I'm Andre Carter, the head chef." Thomas let out a mocking laugh, loud and sharp. "You're the head chef? Well, that explains why the service is so slow. Guess they're letting just about anybody into the kitchen these days, huh?" Andre's expression didn't falter, but a few diners nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. Lila shifted in her seat, whispering, "Thomas, don't." But Thomas waved her off, his voice rising. No, I mean, look at him. I'm supposed to believe this guy knows anything about fine dining. Tell me, chef, do you even know the difference between a filet mignon and a hamburger?" Andre remained composed, though the words stung. He had faced prejudice before, but it never got easier. Round them, the restaurant grew quieter as more diners began to take notice of the exchange. "I assure you, sir," Andre said evenly, "I'm well versed in all aspects of culinary arts. But if there's anything specific you'd like to adjust, I'd be happy to accommodate." Thomas sneered, leaning back in his chair. "Well, for starters, how about we get someone who knows what they're doing? Maybe someone who didn't learn how to cook flipping burgers in some greasy diner." The words hung in the air, heavy and cutting. Andre's jaw tightened, but he refused to let his professionalism waver. "Enjoy your meal, sir," he said calmly before turning to leave. As Andre walked back toward the kitchen, he could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, some sympathetic, others judgmental. He had learned to carry himself with dignity in the face of ignorance. But tonight, something felt different. Tonight, he decided, he wouldn't let the insults pass unnoticed. Behind the kitchen doors, his team looked at him with concern. "Chef, are you okay?" asked Maria, one of the sous chefs. Andre nodded, forcing a small smile. "I'm fine," he said. But deep down, he knew he couldn't let this slide. Not this time. As he prepared to serve the next course, Andre reflected on the path that had brought him here. The struggles, the sacrifices, and the truth that no one in this room, least of all Thomas, could have anticipated. With a calm resolve, Andre stepped back into the dining area, carrying not just a dish, but a decision. He knew that this time, the truth he carried would not only challenge Thomas's arrogance, but also leave the entire restaurant questioning their assumptions. The clinking of utensils and murmurs in the restaurant grew faint as Andre stepped back into the dining area. His movements were deliberate, his head held high, and in his hands was the next dish, plated with meticulous precision. Thomas's mocking laughter still lingered in the air, echoing in Andre's mind. But he had long learned to channel his emotions into his craft. Night, however, was different. Andre approached Thomas's table, his calm composure masking the determination brewing beneath. He placed the plate down gently, catching Thomas mid-sip of his wine. "Here you go, sir," Andre said, his tone steady but firm. Thomas raised an eyebrow, glancing down at the dish. "What's this?" he asked with exaggerated disdain. "This is our second course," Andre replied. "A dish inspired by resilience and tradition. Elements I hold close." His voice carried a weight that made nearby diners pause, sensing that there was more to his words. Thomas chuckled sarcastically, twirling his fork with a smug grin. "Resilience and tradition, huh? Sounds like someone's trying a bit too hard to make an impression." Andre took a half step back, hands clasped in front of him. "Perhaps," he said evenly, "but I've found that a true chef's story isn't just told through words, it's told through the flavors and heart they pour into their food." Thomas smirked, unfazed, and stabbed his fork into the dish. Lila, sitting across from him, offered an uneasy glance at Andre, her discomfort growing with every remark Thomas made. "Honestly," Thomas said, taking a bite, "this is passable. But let's not get carried away thinking you're some kind of culinary genius." Andre stood silent, his gaze steady. "I appreciate your feedback, sir," he replied, his voice calm, but carrying an undertone of quiet strength. But before Andre could turn back to the kitchen, Thomas leaned forward, his grin turning sinister. "Tell me, chef," he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the room. "How exactly did someone like you end up in a place like this? Did you stumble in off the street one day and just get lucky?" Lila gasped softly, her face paling. "Thomas, that's enough." But Thomas ignored her, laughing to himself as he reached for his wineglass. Around the room, other diners exchanged glances, their previous whispers growing into murmurs of disapproval. Even the servers froze mid-step, their trays balanced precariously as they tried to comprehend the scene unfolding before them. Andre's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening as he clasped his hands. He had endured enough of Thomas's cruelty, but he refused to stoop to his level. Instead, he took a deep breath and let the moment settle before speaking. "Do you truly want to know how I ended up here, sir?" Andre asked, his voice low and deliberate. Thomas grinned, leaning back in his chair. "Oh, I'd love to hear it. Please, enlighten us all." The entire restaurant fell silent, every eye now fixed on Andre. Even the jazz music seemed to fade into the background as the tension in the room thickened. Andre straightened his shoulders, his calm demeanor shifting ever so slightly into something stronger, something unshakable. "Very well," Andre said, his gaze locked on Thomas. "But I'll warn you, the truth might be a little more than you're prepared to handle." Thomas rolled his eyes, waving a hand dismissively. "Spare me the theatrics, chef. Let's hear it." Andre glanced around the room, briefly meeting the gazes of the diners who were now hanging on to his every word. His voice carried not just to Thomas, but to the entire room as he began to speak. "I didn't stumble in off the street," Andre said. "I worked my way here. Years of sacrifice, education, and passion brought me to this moment. But before I became a chef, I was someone you might not expect, a man with a past that challenges everything you seem to think you know about me." Andre paused, his next words lingering on the edge of his tongue. The room remained eerily still as every diner leaned in, anticipation thick in the air. With a faint smile, Andre added, "Perhaps it's time I shared the full story, and I promise, it's one you won't forget." Andre stood tall, the soft light of the restaurant catching the faint glimmer of determination in his eyes. His voice, calm yet commanding, reverberated through the room. "My journey to this kitchen wasn't easy," Andre began, his gaze unwavering as he addressed Thomas and the entire restaurant. "I grew up in a small town, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep food on our table. She taught me the value of hard work, resilience, and above all, kindness." Thomas smirked, swirling his wine lazily in its glass. "Touching story, chef," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But I'm not seeing how flipping burgers got you here." Andre smiled faintly, as though Thomas's words had no power over him. "You're right about one thing, sir," he replied. "I did start at the bottom, working in diners, washing dishes, doing whatever I could to stay afloat. But that's not the part of my story that will surprise you." The murmurs among the diners grew quieter, their curiosity overtaking their discomfort. Lila shifted in her seat, her hands gripping her napkin tightly. Even Thomas's smug expression faltered as he realized the chef wasn't backing down. "You see," Andre continued, his voice steady, "before I ever stepped foot in a kitchen, I wore a different kind of uniform. I served this country as a soldier, leading a team in some of the most dangerous combat zones overseas." Gasps rippled through the room. Thomas's hand froze mid-sip, the smirk on his face vanishing as he blinked in disbelief. "I fought for the freedoms we all enjoy today," Andre said, his words laced with pride. "I've led missions, saved lives, and stood side by side with people from all walks of life. And when my time in the military came to an end, I made a choice to take the same discipline, passion, and commitment I had as a soldier and pour it into something new: food." The room was utterly silent, save for the faint clinking of a distant spoon. Andre stepped closer to Thomas's table, his eyes locked onto the man who had mocked him so openly. "I trained at the best culinary schools, worked under world-renowned chefs, and poured every ounce of myself into mastering this craft," Andre said. "So no, I didn't stumble in off the street. I earned my place here through hard work, sacrifice, and a level of determination you wouldn't understand." Thomas's face reddened as he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Lila turned to him, her expression a mix of shock and disappointment. "Thomas," she said softly, "I think you owe Chef Carter an apology." But Andre wasn't finished. His gaze softened as he looked at the other diners, many of whom now regarded him with a mix of admiration and awe. "It's easy to judge someone based on appearances," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "But we all have a story, a past that shapes who we are. And sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who've overcome the most." A smattering of applause began to ripple through the room, starting with a nearby table and spreading until nearly everyone joined in. Andre inclined his head in quiet acknowledgement before turning back to Thomas. "I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, sir," Andre said, his voice calm but resolute. "And the next time you assume someone's worth based on how they look, maybe you'll think twice." Andre stepped away from the table, leaving Thomas to sit in stunned silence. But as the chef walked back toward the kitchen, a voice called out behind him, "Chef Carter, wait." It was Thomas, his tone no longer mocking, but filled with something new: regret. Andre paused mid-step, his back straight and unyielding as the entire restaurant turned its attention to Thomas. For the first time that evening, the once arrogant man sounded uncertain, almost vulnerable. "Chef Carter," Thomas repeated, his voice softer now. "Wait a moment." Andre slowly turned, his expression unreadable. The tension in the room was palpable as Thomas awkwardly stood, straightening his suit jacket as if trying to regain his composure. His face was flushed, and his usual air of confidence had been replaced with hesitation. Thomas stammered, clearly unaccustomed to eating his words. "Look, I didn't mean to insult you. I might have been out of line." Andre raised an eyebrow, his silence prompting Thomas to continue. Lila watched him intently, her arms crossed and her gaze sharp. "Maybe I misjudged you," Thomas said, each word seemingly dragged from him against his will. "I didn't know about your background." Andre folded his arms, his voice calm but pointed. "And would that have made a difference, Mr. Hargrove?" Thomas blinked, unsure how to respond. "Well, I guess. Yes, I didn't realize." Andre interrupted, his tone steady, yet firm. "Didn't realize what? That I was a soldier, that I've faced challenges you couldn't imagine, or that I've earned my place here despite people like you constantly trying to tear me down." Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The restaurant was silent except for the faint clinking of a glass at a nearby table. Andre's words had cut through not just to Thomas, but to everyone in the room. Andre let the silence linger for a moment before continuing, his tone softening slightly. "The truth is, Mr. Hargrove, my background shouldn't matter. Whether I was a soldier, a dishwasher, or anything else, I deserve the same respect as anyone in this room. Judging someone's worth based on your assumptions says more about you than it does about them." A murmur of agreement rippled through the diners. Lila nodded, her eyes fixed on Thomas. "He's right, Thomas," she said firmly. "You owe him more than an apology." Thomas looked around, suddenly acutely aware of the stares and murmurs directed at him. He swallowed hard, his arrogance crumbling under the weight of the moment. "You're right," he said at last, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Chef Carter. Truly." Andre regarded him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a small nod, he said, "Apology accepted, Mr. Hargrove. I hope tonight has been enlightening." Thomas sat back down, visibly deflated. Lila gave him a pointed look before turning to Andre with a warm smile. "Thank you, Chef Carter," she said, "for the meal and the lesson." Andre nodded politely, before turning to address the room one last time. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone," he said, his voice steady. "And remember, respect is free, but its absence can cost you everything." The restaurant erupted into applause, and as Andre walked back into the kitchen, he felt a wave of relief and pride wash over him. For once, he hadn't just endured the insults, he'd confronted them head-on, and the impact was undeniable. Back in the kitchen, Andre's sous chef, Maria, approached him with a curious smile. "Chef, you handled that with more grace than most people ever could," she said. But before Andre could respond, the manager stepped in, looking both impressed and hesitant. "Andre," he said, "there's something you should know. Thomas Hargrove is one of the restaurant's biggest investors. This might not be over." Andre stood in the kitchen, the manager's words hanging in the air. "Thomas Hargrove is one of the restaurant's biggest investors. This might not be over." For a moment, Andre felt a flicker of unease, but he quickly dismissed it. His entire life had been built on facing adversity head-on, and he wasn't about to let the threat of retaliation make him second-guess his values. "What happens next is up to him," Andre replied firmly, glancing toward the dining area. "But I'm not going to apologize for standing up for myself, or for the truth." The manager hesitated, then nodded. "I respect that," he said quietly. "And for what it's worth, the diners seem to agree with you tonight. That applause wasn't just for your food." Andre offered a faint smile before returning to his work, plating the final dishes of the night, with the same care and precision he always did. As the last orders went out and the restaurant began to quiet, Andre allowed himself a moment to reflect. The following day, Andre arrived at the restaurant early, as he always did. The familiar scent of fresh produce and the faint hum of the refrigerator greeted him as he walked into the kitchen. To his surprise, he found a small envelope waiting for him on the counter, his name scrawled across it in bold handwriting. Opening it, Andre discovered a handwritten note. "Chef Carter, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my gratitude. Last night you taught me a lesson I didn't know I needed. For too long, I've let my privilege blind me to the value and dignity of others. You didn't just serve a meal, you served the truth, and it's something I'll carry with me. As for my role as an investor, let me assure you, your position here is secure. If anything, I'll be recommending that the restaurant highlight your leadership and skill more publicly. You're not just an asset to this establishment, you're an inspiration. Thank you, Thomas Hargrove." Andre stared at the note for a long moment, his emotions a mixture of surprise, relief, and quiet pride. It wasn't often that people like Thomas acknowledged their faults, let alone made amends. "Chef?" Maria's voice broke through his thoughts as she walked into the kitchen. "Everything okay?" Andre held up the note with a small smile. "Better than okay," he said. Maria skimmed the note, her eyes widening. "Wow," she said softly. "He actually got the message." Andre nodded, folding the note carefully and slipping it into his pocket. "It's a start," he said. "One conversation won't change the world, but maybe it can change one person, and that's enough for me." Over the next few weeks, Andre noticed a subtle but profound shift in the atmosphere of the restaurant. Word of the incident had spread, and diners began showing up not just for the food, but to meet the chef who had stood his ground. Thomas returned a week later, this time dining quietly with Lila. When Andre approached their table to deliver their meal, Thomas stood, extended his hand, and said, "Thank you, chef, for everything." Andre accepted the handshake, offering a warm smile. "Enjoy your meal, Mr. Hargrove." Lila beamed, adding, "It's Chef Carter, Thomas. Show some respect." The table chuckled, and for the first time, Andre saw a genuine humility in Thomas's demeanor. As the months passed, Andre found new meaning in his role at the restaurant. He didn't just create meals. He created moments that brought people together, challenged assumptions, and celebrated diversity. One evening, as he prepared to leave for the night, he noticed a young boy standing near the kitchen doors, his face full of curiosity. Andre walked over and knelt to meet his gaze. "Can I help you, young man?" The boy hesitated, then said, "I heard about what you did here, Chef Carter. My mum says you're really brave." Andre smiled warmly. "Thank you. What's your name?" "Jamal," the boy replied shyly. "Well, Jamal, do you like to cook?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Then maybe one day you'll be the one in this kitchen," Andre said. "And when you are, just remember, being a chef isn't just about food, it's about heart." Jamal grinned, and Andre stood, watching as the boy joined his mother and walked out into the night. For Andre, moments like this were what made the hard days worthwhile. He had turned a painful experience into an opportunity to inspire others, proving that dignity and determination could rise above even the deepest prejudice. That night, as Andre locked up the kitchen, he looked back at the quiet, empty space with a sense of pride. He knew his journey wasn't just about him. It was about paving the way for others to stand tall, share their truth, and remind the world that respect, when earned and given freely, could truly change lives.